Hello, and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne. We all know that life is hard, right? It's messy, it's unpredictable, but it can be wonderful all at the same time. My hope is that we can take a deep dive into self-development topics and explore life's lessons through book clubs, conversations, and interviews. And together, we can uncover the lessons that others have already learned to help us navigate this crazy, wonderful ride called life. Hello and welcome to Message in the Middle. I'm your host, Marianne, and joining me today is Angela Bixby. Angela's lived beyond the five senses most of her life. She's an empath and a natural claircognizant who often senses what isn't obvious in the conversation, what isn't being said or seen, but is meant or is really there. She'll tell you she got the call to live a more spiritual life back in 2010 when she found her way to psychic school in New York City. But the truth is, Angela walked a spiritual path her whole life as a highly sensitive person. But now, after many years of training, she's mastered ways to support others as they walk a similar path. Angela has received certificates as a psychic medium from Holistic Studies Institute and from the American Federation for Certified Psychics and Mediums. She holds a BA of Psychology from the University of Michigan and a master's certificate in Holistic Psychology from the Holistic Psychology Institute. Her practice style is down to earth and experiential. Angela says we're all psychic and is committed to connecting people to consciousness and their intuition. Good morning. Thanks for joining me today.
Good morning. Thank you for having me, Marianne. I'm excited to be here.
Me too. I've been waiting for this conversation with lots of anticipation to explore this topic. So I would love it if you would help the audience understand your background, because for you, I know this is your second career. And, we talked about you kind of jumping into it at that point of going to the school for psychics. But tell us how you went from having, I'll call it a normal day job to going into this practice. What did that look like?
Great question. Great question. So I was not happy being at a normal job, right? I did really well fitting into mainstream, but I didn't feel like I fit in. I didn't feel like I was like fully expressing kind of who I am and what I came here to this earth to do. And, in addition to that, and this is of course no disrespect to my motherhood walk or my kids, but, I was a mom, I was a single mom at the time that I stepped into this pivot in my career. And so, it was even that I was satisfied as a mother, but I just sort of knew that with all the things going on in my life, there was something sort of missing, right? I knew there was something that hadn't really unlocked in me yet. And so I spent a lot of time, Marianne, hoping, praying, intending, right? So for all of this stuff, because I was really interested in all of this metaphysical stuff and had been interested in it my whole life in different ways and such. Did a lot of meditation in college, things like that. So different points, I kind of dipped into a lot of this, dipped my toe in the water, jumped in full board in some cases. So I was already kind of opening up to what's next. Am I going to be self-employed? What's that going to look like? So I was exploring things that interested me, visual kind of redesign and space design and writing. And, so I was just really kind of opening up to all things creative that really excited me or turned me on. And then slowly I started having, with all of the intending and the praying and the wishing, I slowly started to have some different spiritually transformative experiences. And that's what got me on this path. So I was working with a woman, a mentor. She was a shaman from about 2004 until when I landed in psychic school in 2010. Our relationship continued, but point being, for those 6 years, I was going to her for a lot of services. She really fulfilled that nice role in my life as kind of mentor and spiritual mentor for that time period. So when I did have some of these big spiritually transformative experiences, and they were things like I started to feel energy moving in my body. So it was like a depth of awareness that I was getting in my body. And then I had some weird stuff happen in the dream state and being awakened in the middle of the night. But I was really grateful because I could pick up the phone and call her and say, hey, I've got this wild experience that happened. What's going on? And she said, you're going to be a channeler. You're going to find your way to some kind of channeling school here soon, and it's going to work for you. And so when the call came, right, when I had enough of these experiences and I was talking to her, and it really felt like it was that point where I was getting that call to go to psychic school, I knew I was on path. And then when I had my first experience of being in psychic school, like when I landed in that chair on that first day of class for like a year-long course of study, I finally exhaled and went, okay, I found it. I'm here. This is it. I don't know what this is going to look like to be a professional psychic, because I also felt very much like a baby psychic landing in that first class. It took a lot of work to really bring out my skills and bring them forward. But I knew, I could feel when I landed in that seat that this was it, that all of those years of staying open to what might be next, and am I going to be an entrepreneur, and do I need to be self-employed, right, to really find that depth of satisfaction, landing in psychic school helped me realize that this was it for me for the rest of my life.
And so I imagine that you have gotten some resistance along the way from friends and family and people you used to work with, whatever, you name it, because I know this topic, for some, it's a little too left of center or a little too in the woo space, right? So what do you say to people when they give you that resistance or they have those type of sentiments? I mean, obviously we can't please everybody with any of the choices we make, but I imagine you want to be a cheerleader for what can happen in this space. So kind of what do you say to that?
Great question. Great point of contemplation. So when I landed in psychic school, what I did, it's a lifelong people pleaser. It's a habit that I'll be breaking my whole life. I was concerned and wanted to make sure that the people close to me, my family of origin, the family that I created, my sons, and of course my friends and things, my personal community, I wanted to make sure that they felt comfortable enough. And I didn't tell all of them right away what I was doing because I didn't want to upset them or make them uncomfortable. And then as it started to leak out and I started to talk about it, I reassured them initially that really I wasn't interested in them changing their beliefs. I really just hoped that I would have their support by them believing in me, even if what I believed in the directions that I was moving with this very left of center newfound passion and turned career. And that was really relieving to them. A lot of them exhaled, a sigh of relief. And then they were able to, the ones that wanted to ask more, were able to kind of meet me from where they are and knew that they would be respected where they are and that I wasn't going to push this on them. And, I wasn't going to be walking around reading them all the time, that I had boundaries and respect and all of that. So there was a little bit of those fumbles of sort of the friends and family being like, oh goodness, where's Angela taking us? And can we go with her or not?
Yeah.
Right. So I kind of laid those ground rules and really just asked them to believe in me and support me, even if my beliefs weren't theirs. And that was really helpful. It was liberating for me too, because then it took pressure off of, say, friendships where we did have different beliefs. And for them to then see me and spend time with me while being in psychic school and realize that I wasn't turning into somebody that was walking around reading everybody all the time. Like I hadn't changed per se. My friendship with them hadn't changed per se. And the content of what we talked about didn't have to change. So those things were all really helpful as I navigated those changes and them with me, because this was back in 2010 and 11, and while it doesn't sound that long ago, the world has changed so much and the world is more receptive now to all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And it was even less receptive then.
And so now I'm just curious personally, do they bug you all the time? What do you see? What do you got? Can you tell me anything? Do they ask you that, or do you have those boundaries that they don't?
They're super respectful. I have those boundaries actually. So a lot of friends have fallen away. I mean, you can imagine that, any of us, when we step onto some version of self-improvement, a self-improvement path,
yes,
often a lot of people don't come with us. They fall away. We open up to new community, new friends and things. So a lot of those friends have fallen away. And I have a number of them who they'll pay for a session if they have a lot of things they want to tune into. And they also know that they can ask me, and they don't abuse it at all because they don't want to lose that privilege, so to speak. So they'll ask me, for instance, I had a friend whose mom recently passed away. And she knows from when, she worked with me when her dad passed away, how connected I am. So I was able to give her some messages and things. And she did. She wrote me a few weeks later. She's like, I have a favor. I have no idea where my mom put the will. Can you help me find it? So I was helping her with that, with spirit, telling her where I was seeing it and such. So yeah, they remain respectful and they respect the boundaries.
Oh, I love that. So, all right, let's dig in a little bit. You say intuition is simply an expanded listening, something we all have access to. That's a quote from you. And having studied now, hundreds of hours and worked with many practitioners, healing practitioners, and helped thousands of clients. Tell me, what are some of the most common capabilities you see in people, even ones maybe they don't even recognize in this themselves at first, but that are most often bubble up?
Great question. And it's hard for me to pull out the most common per se. This is what I'll say. We're all energetically sensitive, whether we're aware of that or not. And we all are psychic. We all have a pineal gland and a pituitary gland, both of them in our brains, and our body, I say, is our best divining rod. And so a lot of times when people step onto the development path with me, they're surprised by how much I help them normalize experiences they're already having, right? So many people see this as a set of skills that they strive for, that they're not even in the camp of right now, or if they don't have something natural coming through, they must not have it. But the reality is that we're all perceiving things at a deeper level all day long. And so some examples that I might give are in terms of energetic sensitivity or clairsentience, how you feel things in your body. Think about when you've walked into a room and you either feel really excited and really expansive and like you kind of can't wait to join the group, or if you've had those situations where you walk into a room and you start feeling a little bit like, I'm going to be kind of quiet and fly under the radar. Maybe you have that little bit of a knot in your stomach forming. Those types of experiences, good, bad, or anything in between, are examples of our energetic sensitivity at play, which is a version of us picking up things psychically, right? So psychicness, and psychic information is flying around all the time, similar to like fiber optics and, with computer and technology, or something more human, thinking about love. Right? Like those things fly around unseen all the time. We trust them. We know they're there, but we don't exactly know what they look like. And we utilize them and we engage with them and we feel them. And we don't often step back and think about how we feel them. And so that's kind of what I would say as we start to talk about this, of the normalizing of psychic skills, is that we're all perceiving things psychically all the time. And so you can start with thinking about how you feel, when you walk into different environments. Another example would be, think about when you're having a conversation with a friend and they're telling you about a story of some adventure they went on or what have you, or you're reading a book and you're conjuring up, visuals in your head about it, that you're allowing the picture to be painted in your head as you're reading the words or listening to the words if your friend's recounting a story. And you're kind of crafting this whole visual and tracking the story, whichever way, in your mind. That's an expression of your clairvoyance. That's how we use our clairvoyance often. Every day. Another example of that would be if you're driving down the road, and this probably applies more to you and I and our age band, Marianne, because we lived before there was GPS, right? We would have to look at a map before we drive somewhere.
Yeah.
Right. So I call it this vision that I'm talking about conjuring the story in your head, or this example that I'm about to share with you. I call it map eye as one of the ways that our clairvoyance expresses. So if you've studied a map and you know where you're going, and then you get in the car and you're driving and you're engaged in driving, right? Because we're responsible and all of that. So of course our eyes, hands are on the wheel, eyes are on the road, paying attention. And we're also kind of running this track in our mind, if we're a visually oriented person, of the map of where we're going, right? So we might be coming up on a light and we're like, oh, here's that light okay, yeah, okay. And you're sort of seeing it in your head while you're also engaged with driving. That's an expression of our clairvoyance. And that's when it works really well, because we're engaged in driving. So we're not paying attention to it, but it's running almost like a program or a track running in the background. And so that would be an example of how our clairvoyance is already being utilized by us.
So interesting. So tell me about your own capabilities. What you said at the beginning really kind of struck me as something we should dig into is you said, I'm paraphrasing, but something like it took, hours and hours and hours or lots and lots of training to pull forward your own skills in this realm. So it's not like, to your point that you made earlier, it's not like you woke up and you were like, I have it all. I see dead people, or I see, I'm making fun a little bit, but you know what I mean? It wasn't like this big statement. You worked toward it.
Yeah.
So how did that first show up for you? And then, what are the things that you would say are your strongest capabilities today?
So one of the things that I said a lot in the beginning, I say it a little less now, but it's coming to mind as we talk about this, is the process of psychic development is really about finding that intuitive fire that's burning or smoldering within, and removing what I would call a lot of the wet blankets that we all carry around that are squelching it, right? So wet blankets that squelch our intuitive fire would be things like personal healing that we need to do. That might be things like clearing old stories and beliefs, right? Like, oh, only special people have this, or, oh, I'm just, fooling myself. I'm not really connected, right? So sort of like critical thinking, that inner critic, or if you've been taught in religion that only, saints or dead people make it to these high levels of being able to connect to spirit and God and the unseens and source in these ways, right? So those could all be beliefs and stories that are just like wet blankets that are on your intuitive fire, right? Or, God forbid, if you've been in an abusive situation, raised with maybe a verbally abusive parent or something, you've got a lot of that in your head and your body and your being and your soul. And so the process of psychic development really requires that we clear a lot of that stuff, lift off those wet blankets that are squelching our intuitive fire. And so for me, while I had had huge dreams my whole life that were always like big and prophetic, it's another example of your clairvoyance expressing when you see things in the dream state as your clairvoyance, clear seeing. Even though I had all of that, it was challenging for me when I was in psychic development school to sort of do that clearing and translate my visual capacities into being able to see with my eyes open holograms in the air, right? So for me, it was a very gradual process. When I was first in my first psychic class, my eyes would be closed as we're sitting in a circle, and I might have something float in on my mind's eye every once in a while. And so it was a long process from that to where now, I see holograms in the air with my eyes open when I'm reading clairvoyantly for people. So, my process is proof that everybody's trainable. And yes, it was, the skills were there, and I knew that I had to believe in them and have faith and also do my healing work and remove a lot of those wet blankets that were on my intuitive fire that involved like a lot of doubt, a lot of skepticism, a lot of inner critic stuff, right? The stuff we all deal with. So once you can kind of push that aside and lift that off, then we're a lot more free to develop. And once you start having those, oh my gosh, I said this. Oh my gosh, that's happening. Wow, I'm hearing this, right? Once it starts happening, then it starts to kind of snowball in a positive way. And that becomes incentive to keep doing that personal healing work and lifting those intuitive wet blankets off of our intuitive fire. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I mean, that example of once it starts, I mean, that's typical with any new thing, right? Like I immediately thought about weight loss. Once you start losing, you're like, ooh, I want to do more. Like you get some traction behind it when you see
Yeah.
the results. So similar, I guess.
Totally, totally.
In some of your previous work, you talk about being able to raise your frequency, change your mood, bring more joy. I think people struggle a little bit. That whole concept of, we're all on different frequencies and raising your vibrations, and bring that down into, layman's terms so everybody can really understand what's meant by that. And how do we raise our frequency?
Great question. It's such a divisive topic in a lot of ways because it can be easily heard, seen, received, given as, it can be seen as rude in some circles, right? Some people kind of wield it like, oh, your vibe's just too low. If you would raise your frequency, you'd be more connected, right? Like there's certainly kind of a potentially negative aspect to it. And it isn't intended that way. It's not meant to make people feel like there's a hierarchy or they're more than or less than. Unfortunately, humans wielding information like that, sometimes it comes out that way because we're all kind of sometimes pushing our egos off there with what we're saying. So I like to table that right off the bat because I know that, this field gets a bad rap for a lot of stuff like that. So the reality of frequency and vibration, and there's a consciousness scale put forward by Dr. David Hawkins, and I believe he's passed away now, but he was both an MD and a PhD. And so his scale of consciousness is used a lot when we talk about frequency and vibration. I think it first published in his book, Power versus Force, which was published in 1999. There's also another, I believe he's German author called Frederick Dodson, who has done a lot of work and published a lot of books with a very similar consciousness scale or frequency scale to Dr. David Hawkins. And I forget Frederick Dodson's credentials. I can't remember if he's a PhD, but nonetheless, there are a couple of really solid, valid sources, right? And one of them scientific at that in Dr. David Hawkins. So he did a lot of work and he studied, I'm not sure exactly what his methods were, but I know that this is leaned on a lot, so it's seen as credible. But he did a lot of studying of what sort of the frequency was of different emotions. And that's really where the heart of the frequency work is. And so the frequency of, say, love is very high. The frequency of shame or guilt is very low. something along the lines of love is like 500 or 600 on a like 0 to 700 or 0 to 1,000 scale. Shame, guilt, remorse are down at like 20, 30, 40, 50. And so I find it to be really helpful, Hawkins's consciousness scale, because it gives you visuals and often more information than that about different emotions to help people learn how the frequency, the energetic frequency, the vibration of the emotion is part of what we're meant to be here to experience and understand and learn while we're here. Unfortunately, a lot of people, for all different reasons, hold on to a lot of stuff, right? Hold on to a lot of stuff emotionally, hold on to a lot of stuff from other people emotionally. Those kinds of things are, again, like those wet blankets on our intuitive fire. They weigh down our frequency. They can. And so us learning kind of how we feel and sort of how high we can take our frequency when we're doing things, when we're in joy and we're in the present moment. I would say that the goal of frequency teachings and vibrational teachings are to help people understand and feel empowered, that they can shift a mood and raise their frequency very quickly. Everybody has that power within them. They have that empowerment within them. Right. And so it's meant to be an empowered teaching. It's meant to remind people that they can be in really high vibrations and high frequency. And it's from those places that, again, that snowball kind of builds. We're in those good feeling places and we're like, oh my gosh, it feels so awesome to have lifted a lot of this heavy weight that I carry from listening to so-and-so's problems or whatever, caring for so-and-so. And those are not negative feelings. And we're not meant to not care for people or not hold space for people. It's a matter of how can we work with the energy and understand that when we take on other people's stuff for great reason, to be of service to them and to love them, if we let it stay in our fields and bring our frequency down, we're not helping anybody. So there's this then internal process that we get to learn of sort of how to be of service to people and love people without letting their frequency bring ours down. So there's a lot to say about frequency and vibration. It's interesting though that you asked this, because I have a great example of a student from my coaching program who's just kind of like seeing this. She joined in my program in January. She's committed for a year. And so we do a lot of, practice and development circles. It's a very experiential program. And she absolutely fits this bill of being a great friend, and is there for people, and didn't realize how much her people-pleasing tendencies and caring for a particular friend or being there for a particular friend while her friend's going through some really hard stuff, she didn't realize and recognize how much it was weighing her down and keeping her from being able to develop psychically. We've had a number of conversations about it. She's worked through a number of different practices, and finally something clicked. And so she's experiencing what we're talking about, where she was like, oh my gosh, I need to get a little bit of distance from this friend, not write her off or send her out of my life, but get a little bit of distance, reset my own frequency so that I can be of greater service to her, but also so I can be in a bigger frequency and feel less crappy about life every day, right? So, and it happened. And this morning she had all these messages coming through. So, this conversation about frequency it's so vast. There's so many different directions we can go. But in terms of bringing it back to like our intuition and psychic development, I would say it's best thought of as an empowerment space, so that people can maybe look at a consciousness ladder or consciousness visual and go, okay, I'm feeling really low. I can get higher pretty quickly. I'm just going to go do some things to do that now for myself. And then I can turn back to whomever I want to help or however else I want to engage with the world.
I really like that information about the scale, because I actually didn't know that one existed, and it would probably be a good tool as a visual. But, in general, in my mind, I think a couple of things come to mind. It's sort of putting that bubble around yourself so you have those boundaries, so that, even some of us have family members or whatever that we can't just, do away with, but they are those kind of draining people in our lives. But you can limit your time, limit your interaction, just so sort of set those boundaries and set that bubble and not take back with you the things that they give you. And then I think the other thing is fueling, and you said this, fueling sort of those things that make you feel good, those things that when you're in that, what you call the higher frequency, but I would say when you're in joy, when you're, in love, when you're just feeling fueled and fulfilled with whatever it is, and shedding that people pleasing and instead taking care of yourself. Those are all things to me that'll probably help keep you in that space and feed that space of lifting you up more. So, but good on the scale. I have never known that. So that's interesting. I'll have to check that out.
Absolutely.
So you work with lots of people, you do these year-long trainings, and I know you offer some smaller trainings as well. Tell me what surprises you the most. You're working with all these people. What do you see that or hear that surprises you?
That's a really good question. The commonalities across all the different people. Yeah, it's one of the joys of the work that I get to do, right? So I use as an example my conscious psychic program because I've got, 20 people in there currently, and we're doing these frequent development circles. So it's a really nice pool to kind of pull from. And it's predominantly female, but there are some males in the program, and they're people from all over the country. Someone just from another country just wrapped up a year and left. But, they're all different sort of socioeconomic demographics, different careers, different ages. And so it's beautiful that they all come together in circle and they find commonality through the psychic development process, and they build community. Like, it's such an unlikely group of people to build community with in this way. And that's one of the beauty of it, though, is I feel like it helps the humans almost feel like they're like become better humans, because they understand that while everybody has very different circumstances and very different demographics, this common thread of developing psychically and being able to connect to spirit and uplift each other through messages. And then going an extra step further of like when they have, I just heard this, I heard the same thing, I saw this vision of an angel, I heard it's Gabriel, I saw the trumpet, right? So when they start connecting in this process and have these commonalities, I just can't even tell you how much it does for people and how much it uplifts them and helps build confidence and help them be in those higher vibes and those higher frequencies. So yeah, that's been the most surprising to me. It continues to surprise me, right? Like new people will come into the program again, different walk of life, different career, different kind of personality. And the way they meet in this process is beautiful and sort of get reassurance out of their commonalities with the messages and things.
I love that. My friend Marie says that as different as we are, we're all alike. And I've seen that show up in so many different communities that have formed with people that are really, you would see on the street or see on paper or virtually and say they're not alike. They're very different. But when it comes down to it, the humanness of us all, we're so similar. And our stories are so similar. Tiny little, differences here and there. You had this low where I had a different low or obstacle, whatever, but so similar. It boggles my mind. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Cool though. So I want to ask you about when you do a reading. I think people, and I'm calling it a reading loosely, people often come to get, whether it's cards read or whatever it is, people want very specific details about what you're seeing, not just you, just in general, right? What's being seen, what's being predicted. And I think that one of the things that you talk about is there's possibilities. It's not a certain outcome. And so if anybody is telling you, you're for sure going to meet this guy with brown hair on October 12th at 2:00. I'm making it up, whatever it is, right? That's BS. Or I guess one possibility. Expand on that. And let me not put words in your mouth. Expand on what you mean around that topic.
Absolutely. Yes. So I ask when I do readings, and I call them readings too. So you're great on the language. We're totally in the same ballpark together. When I offer readings, I ask people to bring questions, right? So it's question and answer driven. One of the many reasons I do that, number one, it's a demonstration of people's free will, right? So they're not going to come here and just get all kinds of random or oddly unspecific information that may or may not benefit them. So I'm pretty efficient and direct. It matches my communication style. I want to be able to sort of get them what they want to come here for. And I actually do specify in details a lot. I'm blessed to get a lot of details. So my style is pretty conversational, and so people will bring questions and we'll end up going in depth into topics. And you're right. What I'm seeing as I lean on my clairvoyance the most in readings, I've got it all. I've got the claircognizance, I've got the feeling, I've got all of the clairs, but the clairvoyance is what I lean on the most when I'm in a reading. And so what I tell people is that I'm seeing or we're experiencing together possibilities and potentialities. I personally will ask spirit, is this an 80% chance it's going to happen? What's the percentage likelihood that this will happen?
And they'll tell you?
So yeah, where they're able to. They'll be like, yeah, this is 40%. This is 80%. Yeah. And in addition to that, that's what I mean. I specialize in details because people will come to me with I'm looking for this big, career move. I'm applying to these 3 different companies, and my guides will show me, they'll be like, no, on that one opportunity or that one company. And this is why. This is how their values are going to roll out. This is what you're going to encounter with this manager. This is why it's not going to work for you in a year and a half. And then they'll show me, I'll see the other potentiality and I'll say, this one's going to seem boring. It's going to seem like an easy job to get. But once you get there, it's actually going to help you build these skills. It's going to help you do this. So yes, along the lines of when they're showing multiple probabilities and possibilities and potentialities, I will ask spirit what the percentage possibility is just to help guide them, and so it won't always come in. There isn't always that specificity, and where it is, I try to get that for clients. So it's possible to dig in that much. It really is. Not always, but it's possible. The thing is, it's a great question and a great thing to consider and talk about. The thing that I would encourage people to consider when they go for a reading, whether you're going for a card reading or it's perhaps less specific, or a more detailed psychic reading, remember that this is all information that's being offered up at the moment of that you're having a reading. So it's also possibilities and potentialities for you. None of it is deterministic, right? People even that are very specific in predicting specific outcomes, it might be deterministic, but your free will is almost more important, and what you choose and how you take action on these things is more important. Someone could have a reading and have all these potentials and possibilities, and then just perhaps, and this is why I raise this with you now, perhaps think, oh, okay, I'm just going to eat cereal for 2 days and not apply for any jobs then if this is coming my way. And so what I would remind people of is, no, you're meant to stay engaged as a human in your world with it, and you feather in the information from the reading, right? Remember, it's happening for you. It doesn't mean spirit's going to do it for you and drop that pile of money on your doorstep or drop that offer letter in your mailbox without you going out and taking the action and applying for the jobs in this example. So I think it's important for people to remember that they're a really important part of the process. We get to take action and make choices and make things happen in our lives with the information that spirit brings through.
And that was a great example, because I do think that, right, in my example of meeting so-and-so, I could see people going, okay, well, I can stop dating. I can stop whatever their scenario is, right? Mm-hmm. But no, I hear what you're saying. Like you have to move forward towards it, I guess, to make it come true as well. That's so interesting. So help us understand a couple of things. Help us understand, let's just say I was somebody that wanted to learn card reading. Do I just grab a deck of cards and do I just start flipping them over for people and, see what happens, what I can tell, what I feel like saying? Like what would be the first steps, and how would you offer to somebody to sort of strengthen that and build that skill? Let's just say they're not going to go to psychic school, or that, they can't afford it. The economy's tough right now. What if they wanted to just start on their own? What would you say to them?
Absolutely. So cards are a great idea and a great place to start. I don't use cards. I use them personally, and I don't use them in my readings. I've had lots of students who do. Cards are a great place to start, because it's going to help you learn some of first of all, you're going to learn the cards and sort of how tarot came about and is represented and how it expresses messages for yourself or anybody that you're reading for. So there's a lot there to kind of learn and sink your teeth into and start to understand about, for instance, like a tarot deck, that's going to teach you a lot. And so as you continue to do readings, you're going to build your confidence. You're going to start to get to know sort of the deck and the ways that things come through. And also, I would encourage people to, when you're flipping cards in this example, take a moment when you're flipping cards, especially if you have a question about a particular card. And I would encourage listeners to close their eyes and just kind of tune in and see if there is anything there on their mind's eye. You may have things that are already coming in on your mind's eye with your eyes closed that you're not even aware of. So doing something like flipping cards, or using runes, or using a pendulum to ask questions, right? There are so many different divination tools you could turn to. Also start to close your eyes and see what's on your mind's eye. Remember the power of intention. And when you're doing this, one of the best things you can do is usher out your inner critic. If you're deciding to start flipping cards and you want to develop a little bit, if you go try to take that to your friends or your sister or whomever and prove to them that what you're doing is working, you're going to end up keeping yourself small and possibly keeping those wet blankets on your intuitive fire. And so just remember that if you're diving into this, keep it as a personal pursuit initially, so that you're not taking it and talking about it to the people that might be naysayers and might throw some more wet blankets on your fire. So just allow yourself to be in kind of the reverence of the process when you're pulling out any kind of divination tool, whether it's cards or, like I said, a pendulum or runes or something else, tea leaves that you're reading, right? Bring the reverence to the process, at least within yourself, and just let yourself kind of be with spirit. If you don't believe in what you're doing, you can stay emotion neutral and definitely stay out of the doubt and the negativity about it. because that can kind of like shut some skills down or make them harder to reopen, right? So bringing a neutral emotion, bringing some modicum of reverence to the process and allowing it to be a personal process that you're building within you is going to be really helpful. And just remembering, like, I don't have to prove this to anyone, because so often people sit there and go, oh my God, this reading looks so great if they're flipping cards. And then they'll start cascading into the doubt. Oh, but who am I to do this? Oh, is this really true? Am I just making this up? These are all the things that are obstacles to developing your intuition, right? So the more that you can just stay in that emotion neutrality and not let those voices in, that'll help you build that confidence internally if you're not doing it as though you've got something to prove to anyone else, and certainly not yourself.
Oh, I love
Does that
that.
help?
Yeah, that helps. And for somebody that's going for a reading, 2 questions. I'm going to stick with cards just for a second. If the thought process there is, you pick a card or you turn a card over or multiple cards, whatever. Is the thought that the spirit, I'm using quotes, you guys, air quotes, told me which one to turn over? Or is it just that I randomly picked one and now we're interpreting that one towards my life? What's the thought behind that? Like, what's that supposed to mean?
I would say spirit guided the cards. Whether that means that guided the person's hand to the choosing, or whether that means spirit got you there with your friend to lay out the cards to turn them over.
Gotcha.
Right. I would say spirit had its proverbial, I'm using air quotes now, hand in lots of layers of the process, right? Because it might be the kind of thing where the person says, gosh, this is just what I needed. I was not very positive and I came over and you flipped cards for me and I feel so much better. So I would say spirit's directing the process at all levels. That's how I would credit that.
That's interesting. And then I've heard multiple schools of thought, so I'm interested in your opinion. So if I am a person going for a reading, whatever kind of reading I guess this could apply to, some schools of thought would say, don't tell you anything. Show up with as secretively as I can. You don't know me. You don't know anything about me. You don't know my family, all the things, and see what you can really tell me, because that'll tell me if you really can do this. And then others I've heard say, yeah, this isn't like a fact finding, digging for gold kind of mission. You have to bring some points of reference, some questions with some, frame of reference around what you're looking for and how it applies to you, that kind of thing. Which camp do you sit in?
Well, a great question, a great topic to discuss.
Okay.
I'm question and answer based for a reason, because I'm not interested in proving my connection to anyone. So that's the way that I work. And so I don't do cold readings personally. And I would say that a lot of that thinking is old school thinking, specifically old school mediumship training thinking. And I was trained in the Spiritualist Church of New York, which is it's the oldest mediumship training, right? Like, not so much Holistic Studies Institute in New York, but the Spiritualist Church. Spiritualist tradition is what started in England, and it was brought over in the early 1900s to the US. And that's kind of the style that lots of people are accustomed to, is the sort of older version mediumship style of reading dead people. When spiritualism came about and was getting big, it was at a time when there was a lot less consciousness on the planet. And so there was a lot of drama in order to prove, right, that they were really connecting to spirit. So it would be like table tipping, knocking on cabinets, right? Like this drama stuff, ectoplasm. They wanted to see proof of the spirit world. So its origins of spiritualism, the origins are in proof.
Yeah.
And we're not there now. And so I would say that people's perception of that is left over from the origins of spiritualist teachings. And furthermore, what I would say is, do you want to spend money and have a reading where all you're looking for is proof that the medium is connected?
Super valid.
Or do you want to actually go and ask spirit to help you with whatever information you're open to? It's really, that becomes a function of ego, that testing concept. It's a binary concept of right or wrong, black and white, right? Like, and the work is in unity consciousness. It's higher than ego, right? It's more about love and oneness and God and source and bringing that through. So it's sort of like, if you want to come in and bring testing to the person, okay. But, I'm not, of course, I love it when my clients are satisfied. I do the work that I do to be of service to humanity and connect as many people to their intuition as possible in my work. So of course I want people to feel uplifted and satisfied. And if I'm approaching my work for their approval, I'm not doing it for the right reasons.
Love
right?
that.
It's about being of service to them and channeling spirit for them and source for them. And what they do with it is up to them. They might, and look, I have plenty of people that are not, I'm not for them. And they go away and they're like, now, and they unsubscribe from my list. They don't leave me bad reviews, but I I know, and maybe they didn't hear what they wanted to hear. They wanted to hear something. They came in. I told them what spirit said. A lot of people go away disappointed, and they often come back and they'll say, "I didn't want to hear you tell me that I was going to break up with this guy, but you were right. It happened." And then 2 years later, I met the guy you said I'd meet, and I'm back to say thank you. And now what? Let's look at something else in my future. So, point being, a lot of times when people bring that in and let's just be quiet and see how, bang on she is and see what she brings through. Okay, that's all well and good. I understand where that is. And also it's how people have vetted mediums historically. But I would say, ask yourself what it is you want to get out of it. If it is entertainment and you want to see how accurate they are, great. Go to a medium that likes to do that. But that's not really where I hang out.
I really love that answer and the reasoning behind it. So thank you for sharing that with me. I want to go back to, I could probably talk to you for 3 hours, but I'll try to just go a little bit longer. But I want to go back to when you said you helped out a friend because her mom had passed. Mm-hmm. This is a topic that comes up very often. People lose somebody important to them and they want to connect to them. And, there's some big names out there that's their primary work, right? They do readings of people that have passed over. And I guess I have a few questions. It's that, can you really just, anybody that's passed, you can just be like, hey, Joe Smith, I'm looking for you. Joe Smith, come talk to me. Or does it have to be like they come forward and they want to do the thing and they want to tell you a message? Like, how does that work? Inquiring minds want to know.
Yeah, great question. So I would say it goes back to individual differences and what I call bioindividuality, which is used in the health and fitness spaces, I think, and wellness spaces. But I like it for humans too with this stuff, and for dead spirits, basically for dead people. Some of them, if you knew them to be like a really extroverted person and vociferous, they're probably going to hang around and maybe still give you some advice, right, from the other side. And then others that were like that might not, right? So it's really variable. Some are going to wait until they're called upon, etc. So it's variable when spirits die, kind of what goes on. And it tends to be more, it's a little bit of a function of what we knew of the personality of the dead person. And it's also a function of what it is that we as humans are wanting and needing. So if someone's grieving and sad, their mom who passed away is probably going to be around them, right? In this particular case where I mentioned my girlfriend, she had her dad hang around a lot more after he passed than she did her mom. And she knows why. It's tied to their personalities, basically, and her relationship with both of them. But back to accessibility, which I think is part of your question, and sort of how simple is it and how much can we all kind of connect? Whether you hear, okay, so let me back up a little bit and talk about clairaudience for a second. Okay, so when we hear psychically, a lot of people are waiting for this like huge, high production value, booming voice outside of their body to come into their ear as though there's a person standing next to them, but it's a spirit. It's very rarely like that. Spoiler alert, it's very quiet and very subtle. And it's more often like an earworm. So if you ever wake up with like a song in your head and you can't get it out, you have a song running through your head for days, you're calling that an earworm. That's exactly how the clairaudience comes in. So if you wake up with a song on your mind, pay attention to the lyrics, the band name, the title. There's some message in there for you. And if you wake up and hear, On the Wings of Love by Whitney Houston, and your mom recently passed away, and you feel like, oh my God, my mom's with me. She was watching over while I sleep. You start crying. That's a big yes. Sure. Yes, that's your mom talking to you. If you hear your mom's advice in your head, in your voice or hers, it isn't just you recalling what she would say, it's her talking to you.
Oh, I love that one.
It's really simply that accessible. The hardest thing is, and this goes back a little bit to our discussion of frequency and vibration, when people are grieving and they're sad, they're moving through all the realistic feelings that we have as humans when we lose someone, that can be a low frequency, and that can keep us from sort of feeling or sensing our dead loved ones who have just passed around us. So that tends to be the bigger obstacle when people are grieving, is their grief. It isn't that you're not connected, it's that it can feel hard to sort of hear that, realize it, feel positive about that when you're sad and processing out the loss of someone. So it's as accessible as looking at the sky. It really is. It's more those wet blankets of disbelief where people are like, no, this isn't really my mom talking to me. No, this couldn't be my dad giving me a message while I'm sleeping. It's people's left brain. It's the doubt. It's the analysis. That's part of what makes humans humans, our capacity to be analytical and our capacity to feel. And those two, our emotional and our mental bodies, are also the biggest obstacles for our psychic development, because sometimes we can overthink or start to go, no, that's not true, talk ourselves out of it. Instead of just being in that moment and accepting that it's your dead loved one talking to you, and is them, and just sitting in that and allowing that to take you where it takes you.
I love that. So I got a little bit of goosebumps there because I often say that when I die, I don't really care where I get buried or anything. I'm not a cemetery kind of person. The person that passed that I'm closest to is my mother-in-law. And I often can have conversations with her. It sounds crazy saying it on the air, especially. But
Not crazy.
when you said that about like having a conversation, like there's things that we used to do together all the time and I'll be doing them. And like, I literally am having a conversation with her in my head. And I say this to my kids, you don't have to be with that person. You don't have to be in that spot. Like you could just have the memory and they're there with you and talk through it. But I love how you connected it to that, really me connecting to her, not just me having a memory of a similar experience. So I love that. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
But I also want to go back to what you said about people being in grief and not being able to accept something early on when somebody has passed. Makes so much sense to me. But I've also heard that somebody that's skilled at it can't connect with them because for, I don't know, I've heard 30, 60, 90, whatever date, like there's a certain time period after they pass where you can't really connect. You're saying no. She's shaking her head. You guys can't see it, but she's shaking her head. So you're saying not true.
For me, it's not true.
Okay.
I would say there's a lot of variability and individuality in the way this is done, right? And so I have not had a problem. I have connected to, God forbid, people that were on ventilators in comas that were still alive. I've connected to their soul, why that's happening after they were taken off as they're dying. I had a mother and daughter come in 48 hours after the husband and father had died. This was a long time ago. I had an in-person reading who was right there. So I personally don't have timeframes, haven't had timeframes. There's a quality of course, the spirits on the other side need to kind of figure out how to connect. And so I would say that a lot of mediums that do have those time periods, they may be connecting in a different way that I connect, and they may be waiting until they get more settled on the other side and make it through some of the transitory phases that can go on. And so I understand why people have the guidelines that they have. My personal experience is that I haven't had any waiting time frame or time frame that has to happen for me to connect with them.
Love that. Thank you for that. All right. So we're going to start wrapping up because I don't want to keep you for 700 hours. Well, I kind of do, but I'm not going to. But I want to ask you before we go, so how can people just give me some practical thoughts on how people can start to just really connect beyond the cards? We talked about that a little bit, but what else? What else can they do to really tap into that consciousness level, I'll say, and really try to hone in on it?
Two things. Number one of the most important things is to really know yourself and understand like what your baselines are within you, how you feel in certain situations. Because when you know really how you feel in certain situations, that's when you're tuning into that internal sort of divining rod within you. You're going to be able to understand when you're in different situations where you're picking up different energies or things feel good or not. So that's a really important piece of all of this. But secondarily, something that's a lot more fun, and the chapter that I contributed in this anthology book, Intuitive Speaking Her Truth, chapter 8 was mine. It was on dreams. So I would say, for a fun way to connect to your psychic skills, use your dreams. I'll give you an example. Well, I'll tell you this example, and then it'll kind of illustrate how to do this. So a lot of times when we're really emotionally close to something, it's really hard to read for ourselves. And so I had two situations where I was in that in 2013. And so I used my dreams to divine for myself, to get information versus asking my guides or turning to a pendulum or turning to someone, another reader to help me out. I thought, okay, let me use my dreams. One of them, I was deciding about a business coach that I was going to work with. And it was a big investment at the time, single mom, and just shed my day job. I was like, I want to work with this person, but goodness, how am I going to do this? So I sat with it and I said, let me ask for a dream on it. So the method is you simply just write in a journal what your question is. So I wrote down before I went to sleep, how will working with this person benefit me in my business and my people? I intended, the power of intention is huge, that I would have a dream on it. So I went to sleep. And part of this is it's important to know how you dream, like your baseline. So I went to sleep and I had this dream and I was shown all of these kind of cultures that I didn't typically know in my day-to-day. This woman from this other culture said, all of these people in my community have been helped from me working with you. So for me, knowing how I dream and that it's somewhat metaphoric, I knew that my question was being answered through my dream because I was dreaming of all of these different sorts of people and places. And I was shown benefit and growth and outreach that was going to come. And so I knew, since I had asked that question in my journal the night before, I knew that that was an answer to my question from my dreams, right? So when we're dreaming, we're asleep, our ego's asleep, so it doesn't get in the way with the analysis and the doubt and all the wet blankets, and spirit can just come through and give us messages. Within waking up, I knew from the dream then that I was going to work with this person. I decided on what the deposit was going to be that I was going to give them. And within an hour, I had that many clients call and book to equate that amount of deposit for me to get going and work with that person.
Wow. There's your sign.
Yeah. So it was a lot of different things. I decided to take it to the dream state. Spirit came in. The second one I'll share with you in the audience was I was having tinnitus ringing in my ear for 6 weeks in my right ear. I've had that before. I have allergies, all kinds of things. But also that's you're sort of being attuned. It's your guides trying to get a message through to you. Sometimes when we hear tinnitus, especially if it's like sharp in one ear, I had that going on. I also had a situation in real life, day-to-day life, 3D life, where a friend of mine I was having a hard time. There was a lot of heaviness there with a friend, and I was trying to figure out how to kind of re-navigate the relationship and such. So after this tinnitus for 6 weeks, and I'd done all the things, I finally said, fine, I'm going to take it to the dreams here because no other answers are coming. So I wrote, what am I not hearing? I intend to dream on it. I had a dream and it all unfolded. It was about this friend in real life that I was having trouble with. As soon as I woke up from the dream and realized that and went, I need to distance myself from so-and-so, the tinnitus stopped.
Wow.
So I got the message. And then within a few weeks that sort of all wrapped up and ended and we parted ways, right? Things came up. So the dream state is a great place to turn to if you're trying to get something answered, especially if it's of a big nature where you're maybe too emotionally close to it, right? About that career move, about that loved one, about, your kids, etc., your love life. It can really be a way to kind of remove your ego from the process and see what spirit brings through. The one caveat is knowing how you dream is important so that you understand if it's a typical or atypical dreamscape for you, right? So understanding how you dream is a basis that's important for that. And it can be a really helpful tool and a great way to get questions answered while you sleep.
I was going to ask you, what if you don't dream? So I think there's a lot of people that don't dream on a regular basis, I would say. So I wonder if it would still work.
Yeah.
You think they would still dream?
Totally. Because the people that come in and work with me, they're like, I don't remember my dreams. And I'm like, set an intention that you're going to remember your dreams. And they do, and they start remembering their dreams.
I'm going to try this.
This method helps just from like intending that you're going to get a message from your dream, even if you don't remember them. And then you trust that you're going to get the message. So you try it. Sometimes it can take a couple nights for people that don't dream as readily or don't recall them as readily. So keep posing the same question night after night. It might take 2 or 3 nights, but the answers will come.
That's wild. I'm going to try. I mean, you got to sleep first. So that's number one. But yeah, that's great. This has been fantastic and so much fun. I will post all of your links in the show notes for people so they can go out and check out your work, check out your website, see what you have to offer. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. This has been great.
You are welcome, Marianne. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a joy to be here with you and your audience. So much fun. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Message in the Middle with Marianne. If you enjoyed the podcast, please take a minute to share it and write a review as it helps bring new listeners to our audience. If you'd like to keep the conversation going between episodes, please join us at Facebook group Message in the Middle with Marianne.